Diagnosis Murder is a show that ran from 1993 to 2001. It's a crime drama series where each episode focuses on a mix of crime procedure and light-hearted drama, often balancing serious murder cases with quirky or even comedic moments, not unlike similar shows such as Murder, She Wrote. The series centres on Dr. Mark Sloan, who works at Community General Hospital, but also partakes in crime solving as his son, Steve, happens to be an LAPD detective, which often pulls Mark into investigations. They're joined by other regulars from the hospital, including pathologist Amanda Bentley, administrator Norman Briggs, and various young doctors. Like many shows of its kind, Diagnosis Murder sprinkled in a few themed episodes across its run, including some with a Halloween vibe. But the question is, does this particular episode, the Bela Lugosi Blues, deliver, and does it land well for the spooky season? Let's find out. Without further ado, on with the review. In our opening scene, we see a woman running from a man in a misty area, but she comes to a dead end when she reaches a gate. The man fiddles with a box as she glares at him, but he can't bring himself to open it. He backs away in fear, trips over a rock, and we hear him scream as the camera pans to the moon. Spooky. I like how, at first glance, one would assume that she was the victim in the scenario, but it quickly becomes clear that it's the other way around. Nice use of subversion there. Following the opening credits, we see Detective Steve Sloan hand his father, Dr. Mark Sloan, a case file about the recent suspected homicide.
Victim profoundly anemic, massive loss of blood, no signs of hemorrhaging and cranial cavity.
There was no blood at the scene either.
Fun fact, these two are played by real-life father and son Dick Van Dyke and Barry Van Dyke. They're talking about the guy we saw in the cold opening, and his box, a case for a steak, was found near his body. Spooky. Meanwhile, Jack Stewart, another doctor and friend of the Sloans, is getting ready for a special event. During work of all places, as he's just been named one of LA's most eligible bachelors. However, he was nominated by an anonymous sponsor, and his co-worker, Amanda, finds the whole ordeal suspicious. That's one way to make an underhanded diss. At the opening party, Norman gets snubbed by this posh guy, Ivan Brock, who is the publisher of Empire magazine and owns the LA Flames football team. Jack is soon greeted by the woman from earlier, Mariah Thomas, who claims to be an editor for Empire. I'm guessing the man chasing her wasn't too happy about an article she'd written or something. Anyways, she also ends up snubbing Norman, and then reveals herself as Jack's anonymous sponsor. She goes on to introduce the different bachelors with some oddly culinary-themed language.
Each of these delectable morsels has established himself in a particular field.
This does carry on throughout the episode, by the way. Later, Jack ends up dancing with Mariah, but they're interrupted by one of the other bachelors, Vic Danton. He's apparently in the entertainment industry, and for some reason, they sing Dancing in the Dark by Frank Sinatra together.
We can face the music together.
I don't know, it just comes across a bit awkward to me. I also wanted to point out that, out of all of the bachelors nominated, Vic is the only one wearing a white suit. Not that it's particularly significant, but it did stand out. Anyhow, Mariah then invites him to her bedroom, and we get a nice shot of her walking up the staircase before the camera pans to the chandelier. We then get the same moonshot and scream combo as before. Spooky, I guess, more so cheesy at this point. Mark and Steve notice the similarity between Vic's body and the previous victims, while the women at the hospital tease Jack about his nomination. He doesn't seem too thrilled about it, whereas Norman is absolutely gleeful over the good press for the hospital. Shouldn't that sort of thing come from, actually helping patients? While examining the bodies, Amanda and Mark note 2 small puncture wounds on the necks of both victims, and Mark theorizes that the blunt force trauma was just a cover for the real cause of death. They head over to the fancy mansion where the magazine is housing the bachelors, and Brock isn't exactly being cooperative. Plus, he uses some very unusual wording when talking about Mariah.
Well, she's resting. I'll have her call you when she rises.
Brock eventually agrees to wake Mariah while the Sloanes look around, but he's unsuccessful, so he lets them open one of the storage cupboards. At first it just looks like a load of old junk, but Mark spots a coffin, which Brock insists is just a prop for a Halloween fundraiser.
Right.
Just as Mark and Steve go to open it, Brock trips over a box like a bull in a china shop. What is this, the room? Amanda and Mark discuss the theory that Mariah might be a vampire, while Steve attends the leaving party for the bachelors. He questions Mariah, but she gives him nothing useful and claims she doesn't know who the other victim is. Afterwards, she dances with Jack again, telling him she'll be leaving soon as her work is almost done here. I didn't realise that having a nice dinner every other night counted as work, but there you go. Mark interrupts to speak with Mariah, much to Jack's annoyance. He tells her that he knows the true cause of the victims' deaths, and that the killer at least believes they're a vampire, and that this person needs help. Mariah asks whether anything could actually help them, before going off to dance with another bachelor named Terry Broadhurst, the star player for the LA Flames.
Terry Broadhurst. Garbage men found him in a dumpster.
Well, that was to be expected. The Sloanes have now identified the first victim, a professor of paranormal psychology named Desmond Manners. Explains a lot, to be honest. They also can't find any information on Mariah from before she arrived in LA. While Steve takes Brock to the hospital, Mark stays behind to snoop around and discovers that the coffin has now gone missing from the storage cupboard. He does eventually manage to find the coffin, complete with a pink lining. The next day, Jack announces that he has a date with Mariah that evening, and Mark tries to put him off by sharing his theory about the murders. Jack dismisses it, but Mark tells Norman to give Jack an extra shift in a bid to save his life. Amanda goes to interview one of the other surviving bachelors, a vain stockbroker named Roger Nelson, who reveals that Ivan Brock has been dealing with some serious financial problems. She then meets up with Steve, who explains that before he died, Terry had actually signed with another team, and that Brock had a $20 million life insurance policy on him. Looks like our prime suspect has changed. Nevertheless, Jack has managed to get someone else to cover his extra shift. Mariah sends Jack up to her bedroom before lighting some candles, but Mark arrives just in time. At this point, Mariah doesn't even bother trying to hide anything from him. She just confesses to everything. Apparently, Brock hired her to make it look like all the bachelors were being targeted, rather than just Terry, to throw off suspicion. The episode then takes a rather odd but welcome twist.
One thing they say is true. We're incredibly strong.
Mariah is, in fact, a real vampire, canonically. She gaslights Mark until Jack walks in, and then she starts tossing them both around before Jack finally stakes her with a broken piece of wood from an ornament. You can clearly see where they've made an edit here, and I honestly don't get how that was missed. As she dies, Mark repeats his earlier questions, which is like, why? No dust, what a shame. The episode ends with the group going over the case's conclusion. Steve shows the group what the crime lab suspect was inside Professor Manners' case, while Mark and Jack look at each other in horror. So, what did I think of the Bela Lugosi Blues overall? I actually quite enjoyed the episode, as cheesy as it was. The story was predictable from pretty early on, giving it a comedic unsubtlety. You could see exactly where it was heading, which almost became part of its charm. I mean, really, with all the food references, you could spot the twist coming a mile away. The Renfield Syndrome angle did give the episode a nice edge of realism, since it's a believable alternative to the idea of an actual vampire running around. That said, I do think the puncture wounds would be a lot messier in reality, since most people don't naturally have fangs that sharp. The episode is also filled with vampire references, the nighttime chase with the misty setting, the coffin, the staking. Even the name Desmond Manners is a nod to the actor David Manners, who played Jonathan or John Harker in the 1931 adaptation of Dracula. I did wonder why Desmond Manners didn't just stake Mariah, and it's one of the only things that really bother me about the episode. The two explanations I can think of are 1, he was just too scared as he'd never done it before, or 2, she was hypnotizing him when she was glaring at him like that. I also find it very unsatisfying how Brock just walks off screen with Steve and is never seen again. Still, I love kitsch, so the general lack of subtlety worked for me alongside the campier horror elements, leaning more into fun than mystery. Maybe that's just the horror fan in me though. If you'd like me to review more episodes of Diagnosis Murder, let me know. In the end, it's camp, it's cheesy, and it's full of obvious vampire tropes, and I think that's exactly why it works. Sometimes you don't need subtlety when you can have pink-lined coffins and very dramatic screams at the moon. Well, that's all for this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and as always, thanks for watching.
Too spooky for you. Too spooky for